Hi there, it's Carl Irwin, the common magician, with a short little talk here. This is actually, I had a few minutes here to record something. I haven't really prepared remarks, so I'm just going to try to speak extemporaneously here on a topic that came up at the Magicians Forum. We've been discussing among a number of people, somewhat heated and direct in some ways, and for a reason. But the question was, what makes a magician? The question is a bit odd because it's so big, it's so broad, it's so general. I think the question really was intended, but without full reflection, to say something else. What is a certain kind of magician? There's that undefinable adjective that belongs in there, and it's yet to be determined exactly what that word is. But we're trying to determine what is a type of magician, what makes a certain kind of magician. Because the fact of the matter is that a magician is anybody that does a magic trick. You're a magician. And that was looked at by someone as being a low view or low understanding or poor reflection on the importance of the craft. And I'm sick of that kind of bullying. I don't understand where that comes from. There's no room for that kind of thing. That there is this high and low level of definition. It's all subjective, right? Someone has to come up with their own kind of criteria, and then to just kind of project that out there as if it is authoritative is nonsense, right? It's we can very quickly slip into that fallacy of privileged information. Someone knows something, or that fallacy of professional wisdom. Somebody, because of their stature, they believe a certain thing, therefore it is true. Well, that's not how arguments work. It just isn't, right? There's with a question or a problem, there is an argument to be made, and anybody can make it, because the answer lies in the argument itself, not in the person and not in their perceptions, right? What makes a magician? Doing magic makes a magician. It's the same thing that makes a composer. You write a piece of music, you are a composer. The question there has been recently pushed into, well, I don't see myself as a composer. Someone may have gone to music school and studied and even written some music, but they do not consider themselves a composer. Well, that's fine. You don't have to consider yourself a composer, but you are. It's not a matter of perception. Now, self-perception is a big deal. It's a bigger deal than we know, and I'll talk about that in a minute if I can remember to get back to that point. But really, the act of doing something is the answer. That is the definition. And I'm not being like literal about it, and not, as the word was used, not practical. That practically, legitimately, literally, whatever you want to say it, in all reality, if you write something, you are an author. If you paint something, you are a painter, because you are the painter, right? Take another kind of occupation, or avocation, as we might say it really, would be a comedian. What makes someone a comedian? Someone that does comedy. There's different kinds of comedy. It can be physical comedy, situation comedy. You can write comedy. You can deliver comedy. You can tell jokes. There's many different types of jokes that can be told, but dealing in comedy and presenting it, performing comedy, makes one a comedian. You could then ask what makes someone a professional comedian, a good comedian, this or that kind of comedian, but that's a nuanced question, right? We could also speak on this in terms of, well, what do people typically perceive as being something? Well, I think the problem with that when you're dealing with magic is that magic is such a... Think about the term magic in general, right? Magic is something that doesn't exist, not as it is presented. Now, you can think in terms of the metaphorical, or the... not metaphorical, but the philosophical, we'll say that, that kind of existential view of what magic is. And Nate Staniforth wrote a book on it. I think, what was it called? This is Real Magic, I think, or something like that, or Where is I can't remember what it was. But he's talking about magic in terms of an aesthetic kind of experience. And in that sense, magicians are magicians. But however, in the real sense, there is no such thing as a magician. Not that we know of, right? Someone who really actually does magic. It can perform something that is a supernatural occurrence, a magical sort of thing. It was done by magic rather than by some other means, natural versus unnatural. So when we're talking about what makes a magician, if I was really being literal, and I'm not, I would have to say, well, there's no such thing as a magician. I'm not a smarty pants, so I'm not trying to say that, right? What makes a magician, as we know them, someone who performs tricks, someone who performs illusions, does mentalism, kind of the broad umbrella term. It is someone who does those things, is that. I think we really can't define it by any other way. To address the assertion that this is not a serious or deep view, I think this is the only serious and deep view. I don't think you can be more serious than what I'm saying. I take it very seriously. I love magic. I do magic all the time. I am a magician. You tell me I'm not, and you're wrong. I am. I do it. And I'm serious about doing it. I've devoted a lot of time, free time, that I could be doing other things to doing it. I don't put a lot of skin in the game like a lot of you do, who are professionals and you make a living on it. But nonetheless, I've invested quite a bit of it in it. It doesn't make me right. In any of these arguments, but you can't say I'm not serious. You can't seriously say that I'm not serious, or that I'm not thinking deeply, or that I haven't. I am presenting an argument at a low bar. Where are you coming from? I call this snobbery. It's just snobbery in one of its many forms, and we see it in every avocation, in every professional kind of situation, and in amateur situations where people define something based on their own point of view exclusively, and they create a criteria based on their own point of view, and they create a adjudication based on their own point of view. That is the essence of snobbery, and it's not where I'm at. Some are, not me, because I am serious, not because I'm not. So let's talk about what makes a composer, because that's such I think, a good analogy, and I can speak to it as a musician and feel confident about it. It doesn't mean I'm right, but I can feel confident about saying it because I am a composer too. There's a person by the name of Nadia Boulanger, who's a French, I have to get this right, she was a French compositional educator. And it seems weird to say that. What is a compositional educator? Someone who teaches composition. Nadia Boulanger would say about herself, and wanted it written in the history books, that she never wrote music, that she was not a composer. In a general sense, there really is not material that's available that she wrote. She did write some music, and in that sense, she must be a composer, whether she likes it or not, by my argument. She was a composer. I'm not sure any of that material is surviving, and she felt that her material was junk, and it was trash, and that it wasn't really to be listened to. But she did, in her younger years, write a little bit of material that was featured in some festivals at that time. But really, she taught theory and composition to a number of very well-known composers, like American composer Aaron Copland, and went down in the history books as a teacher of composition who did not write music and was not a composer by her own sense. And that, I think, gets to the point there. What makes a magician a magician? Well, if it is certainly that you do magic for oneself, in the case of Nadia Boulanger, it must be self-perception that must have something to do with it. And I can bring in another historical figure, a character, Frank Abagnale, who we know as a well-known con man, and had the motion picture directed by Steven Spielberg starring Leonardo DiCaprio about him, Catch Me If You Can. I actually knew about Frank Abagnale when I was in junior high, long before that movie was made, when he had written his book. And I had heard him give a lecture on the radio. And he was talking mostly about the importance of family and how a broken home was a major contributor to his problems as a con man. Not deflecting, certainly, responsibility at all, but that was the talk. That's what it was about. But he did talk at length about issues with people who are professionals or getting into something. They are developing a career, in that people do well to see themselves as the thing they desire to be, that is a very important, essential quality in becoming great at something. And for the con man, it is the only thing they have, right? So as a con man, he would see himself and visualize himself as a pilot, so that he could pretend to be a pilot. He would visualize himself as a lawyer, visualize himself and see himself and carry himself and behave as a doctor, so that he could pass himself off as a doctor. Now, the curious thing there is that by the definition of some of these things, Frank Abagnale was not merely an imposter for some of these occupations. There are cases where he actually was. For example, he did some teaching, I think, at Brigham Young University or something, posed as a professor of sociology or something like that. And he taught for a period of time, a semester or something. And the fact is that he did teach the class. In spite of the fact that he was an imposter and got the job as an imposter, he did teach the class, and he was a teacher. On the other side of it, he was not a pilot because he never flew a plane, you see. So self-perception can't be everything, but to oneself, it can mean a whole lot. So if you're trying to figure out, if the question is, what makes me a magician? How can I be a magician? How do I know when I have become a magician? Well, the answer must be that you do magic and you see yourself as the thing you desire. You do magic and you see yourself as a magician. Whether you like it or not, when you do magic for someone, they will see you as a magician because you already are. But to oneself, kind of in that existential plane, perhaps you need to see yourself as a magician, and that's part of it. There are many performers out there that get into performance art like magic, which is really easy, right? Magic as an art form, as a performing art, it can be a very easy endeavor, because you can do magic that is not difficult. It doesn't require any amount of skill, and it can be very good magic. It can be done very well. It's a falsification after all, right? It's all a cheat. It's all a lie. It's a con. That's what doing magic is. And in that sense, when you're trying to do something that seems real that is not real, we're cheating all the time at it, which means you can take the easy route. Magic is the one place where you can cut corners, and it might be the very best thing to do. I'm sure there's other things like that, but magic certainly is like that often, where the goal is to do something that is efficient and acceptable and achieves the outcome with the least amount of effort, particularly whenever the magic that we're doing is supposed to demonstrate something that's quite not only magical and impossible, but maybe on the realm of highly difficult, right? One can put a needle through their arm. You can do that, but that's very difficult, right? To put a needle through one's arm, it can be a real thing, or it can be a magical effect because it can be faked, right? And doing it using the methods that are an illusion is easy. It's certainly easier than actually putting a needle through your arm, right? That's much more difficult in terms of what you must endure and the pain and dealing with that in such a way in which it seems like it is magical when it isn't. It's a real thing. Okay, so just tip of the iceberg conversation here. Another thing that came to mind in all of this discussion was something that just happened like last week, I think. I saw on the news a gentleman was flying a plane, maybe in Florida, I think. I can't remember. It was the East Coast, I think, southern East Coast, flying a plane out over the ocean, and or rather they were riding in a plane. It was a Cessna, and the pilot became incoherent, unable to fly, was having some kind of a medical emergency, and was really out of the equation. Incoherent, maybe unconscious. It really wasn't clear in the reporting what happened. And the person riding, who had no flight experience and was not learning to fly, as far as I know, was just a person that was going out for a joyride with this pilot, was able to get on the radio and got a hold of traffic control and said, "I've got a problem up here. I do not know how to fly a plane, and my pilot cannot fly the plane." So after some time, air traffic control was able to give this person enough information to get a heading created on that plane, which is a complex aircraft. It wasn't a simple aircraft. It was a complex kind of instrumentation. Got them pointed to an airport. It was a big airport even. It was the nearest one they could get to, and was able to talk them into landing the plane. And it went over the radio there, over the air traffic control signal to other pilots that were on the ground watching all of this happen, commercial pilots, other private aviators, that this person just landed that plane that everybody saw land and had no flight experience. And what made the news really newsworthy is that first that it happened, but also that the landing was so good. The landing was a really textbook landing, which is hard for experienced pilots to do in many cases, right? And one of the pilots responded, as I recall from the news story, said something to the effect of, "Well, welcome to that new pilot." Right? And the thing is that it's not just a cute saying, because what the pilot was saying is true. The person flew the plane and landed the plane. They indeed are a pilot. Right? Not technically, but actually. Right? They're not a pilot. They were the pilot in that moment. Right? Now, are they licensed? No, of course not. Are they going to get gainful employment flying a plane without any other kind of experience or practice? Certainly not. But the fact of the matter is that in a real, tangible, practical, in every way that matters, they certainly were a pilot in that moment, right? This is so much less than that, though. We're talking about magic, right? We're talking about, I don't mean that this isn't important. It's important to me. It's important to you. We love this stuff. We spend our time in it. But it is a con game after all, right? Magic doesn't exist. It's a fascinating term for a practice, right? To be a magician. Being a magician really means one thing, is that you do magic. That's it. That's really the only thing. Now, do you have a deeper question than that? Right? What makes a certain kind of magician? What makes me a serious magician? You could put it that way. What makes one a serious magician? What makes one a respectable magician? And then we can certainly talk about some of the subjectivity, and there'll be disagreements or whatever, but at least you're kind of defining with an adjective exactly what it is you're looking for. And people can certainly converse about that. I think what you're getting at is, what gets you to a point where you yourself can call yourself a magician and know that you're right in doing so? And my answer to that is, you're performing magic and you see yourself that way. That's really it. Because if you can perform magic, if you can perform magical effects and they work, they are successful, and you are, I hate to just put it in these terms, but you're fooling your spectator. You are convincing them of something as having apparently occurred when it did not. Your magic is effective. You are effectively performing magic. If you're doing that The only thing left is self-perception. That's it. Nobody can tell you that you have to study deeper, you have to read these books, you have to do this kind of trick, you have to have this sort of repertoire. Because really, you can do 5 tricks your entire life and be a pro, right? You can have one set of 5 of the easiest tricks ever to execute. So long as they are, effective, you can make a living on that. You really can. I've seen some stuff broadcast out there, from the great mecca of magic, the Magic Castle, and it's just classic material that most anybody really can do. There's some of those kinds of acts, and they're not low bar acts. I don't want to paint that picture. It's good magic. It's very good magic. It's effective, highly effective. And that can be it. I've talked to some professionals on here, on forums and in emails and on the channel, my channel here, where they are very honest about the work they do. They say, well, I never work with that kind of stuff. I focus on this over here. And as a professional, I really don't have time to invest on that. I really have to work on my act, the thing that I do. There's a sense in which being a professional at something can be quite more limiting than being the amateur, and professionals can speak to that. As a musician, right, as a composer, a lot of the composition I have to do isn't the kind of composition I want to do. I'm much more limited than someone who is spending their time as an avocation to do what they want, what they choose, and writing the things that they want for themselves as well as for other people. So there's that as well. But anyway, what makes a magician? Doing magic. What makes a composer? Writing a piece of music. You don't have to see yourself that way, but you are. You can pretend not to be like Boulanger, but you've done it, right? If you've done it, you've done it. You can write one piece of music, and that makes you a composer in every way that matters, not merely in a cutesy sort of sense. You can write bad music. You're a composer. You might be a bad composer, right? But you're still a composer. That is something curious, though, there too, to extend this another minute or so, is what makes a bad magician? Well, can there be such a thing as a bad magician? Given that magic is so unique in that it depends on effectiveness, right? You can write bad music, and you can play music badly and be a bad musician or whatever. I don't think you can really ever be a bad magician, because a bad magician can't be a magician at all. There's no effect, right? If you're dealing with the effect, if you're dealing with the fooling aspect of the convincing aspect of the illusion, if that is not present, you can't possibly be a magician. You could be a comedy magician. You could be, as we call, which is really a comedian, someone posing as a magician, the kind of the Amazing Jonathan sort of thing, where there's really never any effect. It's really all comedy, and it's all about the comedy of error and failure, that sort of thing. So what makes a comedy magician actually a magician? Right? It'd have to be someone who does magic, performs effective magic that is funny. Right? That would be a real comedy magician if we're really parsing this stuff out here. Anyway, so much of nothing there. But anyway, I think you're really looking for a different question than the one that's posed. I think it has more to do, if I were to guess at what your question really is, I think what you're trying to say, you correct me here, but I think what the question really is how do I know when I am a magician? That's deep, right? And I think we've answered that to some degree. At least I've given you my answer to that. And some other people have some other things to say about it. But anyway, be kind. I don't tolerate bullies. I'm a teacher. I'm a school teacher. I don't go for that kind of stuff. When you're telling someone that their viewpoint is low and their viewpoint is not serious, just because you view yours as high and serious, shame on you. That's all I got. Good luck with that. Happy magicking.